Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Leader Procurement webinar. My name is James Claffey, Project Manager of CAP Network Ireland. I'm very happy to welcome here for this webinar this morning, hosted by CAP Network Ireland in partnership with the Department of Rural and Community Development and on Gaeltacht. I'm very delighted to see such a large attendance here this morning, which I suppose shows the demand for some information on the topic. And I suppose this topic is very popular among everyone working within the sector. As said, it's hosted by ourselves in the Department of Rural and Community Development and on Gaeltacht, and we're going to have some opening remarks from Marie Duffy in a minute, and then we're going to have a presentation from our colleagues in the Office of Government Procurement, Fiona Costelloe and Colin Doyle, and then we will follow that by a Q&A session. So can I encourage everyone please to pop their questions into the Q&A function on your screen, and we'll take as many questions as we can. And I'm joined by some of my colleagues here in Cap Network Ireland, and we'll try group them as best we can into common themes as well to deal with as many as we can. But I will say, if we don't get to all the questions this morning, needn't worry. We are going to record all the questions and we're going to do an FAQ as a resource for everyone afterwards, so you can go back and have a look at that, and we will email that to all attendees. It's also important, I suppose, to remember that today's webinar is being recorded for everyone's benefit, so you can play back the session if you have any further questions or just want to go over anything in particular, and you'll also be able to study and re-look at the presentation from Fiona and Colin this morning. Um, as I said, please do put your Q&As into the webinar box and it will be circulated afterwards. And if you are having any technical problems during the webinar, or you have any need any assistance, please email my colleague Alice here at alice@irishrural.link for any assistance that we can offer throughout the webinar this morning if there is any problems. I do encourage you to please use social media as well and promote this event this morning among your colleagues for those that were unavailable to attend. So please make sure to tag Cap Network Ireland, but also the department as well. So look, very conscious that there'll probably be a lot of questions and we've a nice bit to get through, and we'll try to get through it as concisely as we can. So I'm now going to pass over to Marie Duffy from the Department of Rural and Community Development and on Gaeltacht for some opening remarks, and I'll share my screen now and let Marie come in there.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I'm just going to put up some slides as well, just to keep me on the straight and narrow. Just make sure it's in full picture mode. Okay, so good morning, everyone. As James mentioned, my name is Marie Duffy, and I manage the Leader Policy and Operations Unit in DRCDG. So procurement is an area that is consistently raised by leader stakeholders and people on the ground as an area where further training will be welcomed. And therefore, I would really like to thank our colleagues in the OGP, Fiona and Colin, for being here this morning to present on the topic, and for the CAP Network for facilitating the event. So this morning's, sorry, now I'm having technical difficulty in myself there, switching slides. So this morning, Fiona and Colin will provide practical guidance on the National Procurement Guidelines, with topics including procurement of goods and services, some information on construction and capital works projects, and highlight other considerations such as green and social procurement. I think it's just important to link that to the operating rules. So I suppose everybody in the call will be familiar with the Leader operating rules, and Section 16 of the operating rules cover procurement. And the way we deal with procurement under the Leader programme is we have two categories. So Category 1 procurement, as described in the operating rules, focuses on the National Procurement Guidelines, and that's what will be covered in today's webinar. So the National Procurement Guidelines apply where the award of total public funding is more than 50% of the project costs. So therefore, if you have any questions on this area, they can be directed to Fiona or Colin today, or through the OGP mailbox, which is on the slide there. The second category, Category 2, as set out the procurement rules, relates to the procurement activities outside the national threshold. I suppose these are leader-specific procurement rules, and they won't be covered in today's presentation. But as always, any queries you have can be directed to the Leader Policy and Operations Unit mailbox, which is on the screen there. Finally, I suppose I just want to note that if you have any questions on Leader in respect of where the operating rules are, etc., they can be found on the website gov.ie/leader. So I'm going to hand it over to the experts now, just to bring you through the procurement.
Marie, thanks very much for that as well. And just to again to remind everyone about the Q&A function as well. And I suppose look, just to also to point out that we won't be dealing with individual cases. It wouldn't be appropriate to do so. So there would be genuine questions or general questions. So please do function out, but we're not going to focus on individual cases. As Marie said, there is email addresses there as well that they can be dealt with, I suppose, for the purpose of. So look, I'm now going to pass over to Fiona and Colin to share their screen and kickstart us in this.
That's perfect. Well, good morning, everyone, and many thanks for logging on to today's webinar. So my name is Fiona Costelloe, and I'm here today with my colleague Colin Doyle, and we are both from the Public Procurement Policy Unit in the OGP, so the Office of Government Procurement. I lead on SMEs and innovation, and Colin leads on green. And many thanks to the team and the team in DRCDG for arranging today's session and inviting us to provide an overview of public procurement. So today myself and Colin will provide an overview of what public procurement is, the role of the OGP, public procurement in Ireland, and some of the available resources from the OGP, aspects of strategic public procurement, and then we'll touch on some capital works management framework as well. So we'll start off with public procurement of goods and services. So what is public procurement? So public procurement refers to the process by which public bodies purchase works, goods or services from suppliers, which they have selected for this purpose. It ranges from the purchase of routine goods or services to large-scale contracts for infrastructure projects and includes a wide and diverse range of contracting authorities. So this is the definition that we have in the Public Procurement Guidelines, and as you can see, public procurement can really range in its scope. So I think it's helpful to outline the role of the OGP. The OGP are two separate divisions under the Department of Public Expenditure, Infrastructure, Public Service Reform and Digitalisation. There is a sourcing division who are one of the central purchasing bodies in the state, and they source products and services including arranging frameworks. So this could include stationery materials to Garda uniforms to laptops. And then on the other side of the house sits the policy side, such as myself and Colin, and we develop the National Public Procurement Policy in Ireland. We create resources and information for public buyers, and we've been developing Ireland's first national public procurement strategy. So there's often a perception that public procurement rules are very complex. And just to give you an idea of how the rules and policy all fit together, you can see on screen this diagram breaks it down. So in Ireland, we follow the EU public procurement directives for over the EU threshold. Currently, the directives are being revised, so we can expect some changes coming soon. I'll touch on the EU principles in the next slide, but just to highlight, there are the EU directives, and this is the legal basis and approach for public procurement in the EU. So we have the directives, which is then transposed into national legislation by each member state, and usually through statutory instruments, and then these can be broken down into government policy. So part of the OGP role is to develop the government policy and circulars to provide direction for public buyers through guidelines, circulars and resources. So a good example of this would be understanding the importance of SMEs and the government not wanting unintentional barriers to be in place, which could prevent SMEs from participating in public procurement. So this is outlined in the Public Procurement Guidelines. But then in 2023, the OGP also published Circular 523, initiatives to assist SMEs in public procurement. So this provides practical measures for public bodies that they can consider to ensure they are not creating barriers for SMEs in their procurements. So as it currently stands, there are 3 EU directives which outline the legal basis and process on how public procurement should be fulfilled. But there are also 5 principles which come from the EU, and they are non-discrimination, equal treatment, transparency, proportionality and mutual recognition. And these provide the spirit and the guiding principles for public procurement. So now looking at the policy in Ireland and getting into a little bit more detail, the diagram here we have maybe a little bit small to read on screen, but these can be found in the Public Procurement Guidelines for Goods and Services, and it provides the breakdown for the approach of public procurement depending on the value of the contract. So if it's less than 5,000, you should obtain verbal quotes and select the most suitable quotes. And it's best practice to receive a minimum of 3 quotes by emails just to ensure good governance and transparency. Then between 5,000 and the national advertising threshold, which is 50,000, you should consider using a simplified procedure on e-tenders to obtain quotes. And this is currently being improved by the e-tenders team. Email requests for quotes to at least 3 suppliers. Evaluate responses against specified requirements, select the most suitable offer, and advise all tenders of the award of the contract. And then if it's between 50,000 and the EU threshold, so that would be 140,000 for government departments and offices, or 216,000 for local and regional authorities. So for this, it would be to prepare tender documents, award and selection criteria, agree weighting of award criteria, advertise on e-tenders, evaluate tenders, select the highest scoring tender, and then award the contract and provide unsuccessful tenders with sufficient feedback. So then, just as I mentioned there, the e-tenders platform, the OGP do manage an online tendering platform called e-tenders, which can facilitate these tender competitions. So the new e-tenders was updated in May 2023, and there are a number of functionalities on the site, such as advertising new tender competitions, using a simplified procedure to get quotes, or using a prior information notice, a PIN notice, to alert the market for upcoming tender competitions. In order to be able to publish a tender, you'll have to be registered as a contracting authority, but there are videos and instructions on the website on how to register. So as mentioned, there are a number of resources available on the OGP website to support buyers. As you can see, these can be found in the National Public Procurement Policy Resources section of the website. The aim when updating this website was to create an accessible section that would make it easier to find resources that the unit have developed, host our current national policy, and signpost future policy initiatives, presenting the legislation and administrative frameworks, and also to encourage the use of strategic public procurement. So that includes green, social, and innovation. So if you're looking for a starting point, this section on the OGP website is a really good starting point for all of that. And then one aspect I'd like to touch on is the strategic public procurement area. So what we mean when we say strategic public procurement is an umbrella term for innovation, socially responsible public procurement, and green. However, strategic can also incorporate SME access, and that's another priority for us under this. By incorporating strategic elements into your procurement, this can be a key lever through which wider government strategy, policy objectives, and wider social and economic and environmental benefit can be achieved. So it's looking at your procurement openly and seeing if there's any opportunity to provide extra value from these or achieve your own objective by using these tools. So the potential of SMEs are understood, and in the OGP we are committed to support SMEs and social enterprises access public procurement. So to support contracting authorities, we have updated our SME webpage to inform and encourage contracting authorities to, as much as possible, reduce any potential barriers to SME participation in public procurement. So as you'll see on screen, this includes an infographic on SME-friendly practices in public procurement. This breaks down the procurement process to buyers and shows what measures can be taken in the pre-tendering, tendering, and post-tendering stages that will help include measures that support SMEs in tendering. So this could include breaking down contracts into lots or consider hosting a bidder's briefing, but there's also organisational measures in there as well, such as utilising preliminary market consultations and consider seeking quotes directly from SMEs and social enterprises. These are all actions which can be used to enable better public procurements by encouraging SMEs and social enterprises to participate, and that provides greater competition. So moving on to innovation, there is a perception that innovation is a more complex and riskier option, and currently it is underutilised across Europe. So currently there are three main approaches to innovation procurement. There's the pre-commercial procurement, PCP, public procurement of innovative solutions, PPI, and innovation partnership. So however, there are gentler innovation-friendly approaches which can be taken, and that's such as allowing the use of variants in tenders and developing criteria from a functional approach instead of just looking at the specifications. So we updated information available on the OGP website and provide an overview of innovation, information on each of these approaches, and then we also have a frequently asked questions page with useful links. So it's really useful to consider innovation as a tool rather than as a standalone process. If you're considering a challenge you're currently facing and there may not be the right good or service available on the market to really solve it, then innovation can be a really useful tool. You can open to the market and allow them to provide innovative solutions if you're focusing on the functionality rather than just the specifications. So I'll now hand over to my colleague Colin, who will walk you through green, social and the capital works framework.
Thanks very much for that, Fiona, and good morning, everyone. So now looking at the area of green public procurement. So just to give you an overview of what green public procurement is, it's a process whereby public bodies seek to procure goods, services and works with a reduced environmental impact throughout their life cycle when compared to goods, services and works with the same primary function that would otherwise be procured. So the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment are the policy lead for GPP in Ireland. They published Buying Greener in April 2024, which was Ireland's second national GPP strategy. The OGP supports the department by leading on a number of actions from Buying Greener and providing guidance and resources for public buyers. A key guiding principle for you regarding GPP is the GPP implementation mandate included in Buying Greener. I won't go into too much detail now, just to save a bit of time, but a full breakdown of this is provided in Buying Greener. So in terms of the three steps included in the GPP implementation mandate, so the first step is the needs assessment. So this would be confirmed by tender planning stage, but you could still think about elements such as avoiding unnecessary purchases and considering resource sharing, reuse or repair options. In terms of the second step, so inserting GPP criteria, this focuses on the inclusion of GPP criteria once a decision to undertake public procurement has been made. So you can find relevant GPP criteria in the national GPP criteria, the EU GPP criteria, minimum environmental criteria in Appendix 3 of Buying Greener, or consideration should be given to using an innovative procurement procedure to find goods, services or works to address a specific environmental need that cannot otherwise be met. In terms of step 3, so this is comply or explain. So this isn't really a focus for anyone on this call, as it only really applies to government departments or public sector bodies that need to report under the public sector climate action mandate. So if you were to focus on step 1 and step 2, you'd make a good case to pushing forward green public procurement in your tenders. So then in terms of resources, there's a GPP criteria search, which is a digital representation of the national GPP criteria published by the EPA. And this can be found at gppcriteria.gov.ie. In terms of the OGP information web pages, so there's web pages on GPP and Sustainable Public Procurement News. So here you'll find information and links to additional resources. And then there obviously is Buying Greener, published by the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. So moving on to socially responsible public procurement. So socially responsible public procurement aims to address the impact on society of the goods, services and works purchased by the public sector. It recognises that public buyers are not just interested in purchasing at the lowest price or best value for money, but also in ensuring that procurement activities are procurement achieves social benefits and prevents or mitigates adverse social impacts during the performance of the contract. So the OGP shows continuous support for the inclusion of social considerations into public procurement. We have a dedicated information page on our website which focuses on social considerations and the legal basis for their inclusion. So what type of social considerations are there? So on the screen in front of you, you'll see a wide range of different social considerations that can be included in procurements. So once they are linked to the subject matter of the contract. These include employment opportunities for people experiencing social exclusion due to long-term unemployment, homelessness, discrimination, or other vulnerabilities. Societal participation and employment opportunities for persons with disabilities, including through inclusive and accessible work environments, employment opportunities and training, and promoting good employment practices, promote fair treatment of workers, promoting employment opportunities, training for disadvantaged persons and social inclusion, social enterprises, so providing procurement opportunities for social enterprises and through the use of reserved contracts, social inclusion, preventing discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, disability, or sexual orientation, gender equality, so for example, facilitating work-life balance, reducing sectoral and occupational segregation, ensuring equal treatment in the workplace, and then tackling poverty, inequality, and promoting opportunities. So once again, turning to resources, and there are the OGP web pages, as mentioned previously. There is opportunities and a publication called Opportunities and Approaches for Sustainable Public Procurement. So you'll be able to find this on our website as well. So this is this reference brings together in one place a wide range of international, European, and national policies and guidance across both green and socially responsible public procurement. And then there's also Making Socially Responsible Public Procurement Work. This is a publication by the EU, and it showcases 71 examples of how public procurers have achieved social benefits in practice. So moving on to the CWMF, so the Capital Works Management Framework. So colleagues in the Infrastructure Division have a responsibility for works policy and have shared the following slides for us to run through today. So the Capital Works Management Framework is a set of guidelines and tools used by the Irish government to ensure that public construction projects like schools, hospitals, and transport infrastructure are delivered efficiently, cost effectively, and to a high standard. So the CWMF provides a structured approach to the planning, procurement, and delivery of public capital projects. It standardizes processes across departments and agencies, promotes risk management and accountability, and facilitates consistent documentation and decision-making throughout the project lifecycle. So the core objectives for the CWMF are cost certainty, value for money, and efficient delivery. So the Commercial Skills Academy, as part of the Infrastructure Division in DEEPR, provide learning supports to the public sector. These focus on supporting the CWMF, the National Development Plan, Project Ireland 2040, and the implementation of Accelerating Infrastructure Action Plan. So learning supports include self-directed learning, classroom training, and virtual information sessions, among others. In terms of e-learning courses, the CSA worked with the construction policy team and the policy team within the OGP to develop in-house training. You can now complete the Introduction to Public Procurement module as a standalone training piece to provide you with the understanding of EU directives, statutory instruments, the Public Spending Code, and the CWMF. So learning can be continued as part of a longer 5-module course focused on the CWMF. So participants who complete this training will gain knowledge of public procurement, the National Public Procurement Policy Framework, the Capital Works Management Framework, procurement planning and contract strategies for public works projects, as well as this Public Spending Code syllabus. So this course is available on the Learning Management System via the link on this slide. So a particular focus for this group may be the e-learning course on small works projects, so the PWCF6. So this is a self-directed and interactive e-learning course. It's designed for anyone who is involved in public procurement processes for small works projects valued at less than €1 million. So there are 2 main parts to this course. Part 1 is how to procure a single point of contact design team. And part 2 is how to procure and appoint a main contractor for the works. So these courses are hosted on the CSA's learning management system, which is accessible through the link on this slide. So users should request a new account and then have to accept the privacy policy, accessibility statement, and cookies. So an example of the form to be completed is on the right of this slide. And so just to flag that the LMS system provides supports for the public and civil sector. And if you are not a public or civil servant and access is required, you'll have to follow up with an email to the address provided in order to arrange access. So you see the address on the slide there. So CSA Academy at per.gov.ie. So then once access is granted, you'll receive confirmation notification when your account has been approved. So then moving on to key contacts and resources. So there's a link to the CSA website again. So you may be interested in registering for the updates on the CWMF, which can be done through the CWMF webpage. So support for the Commercial Skills Academy can be accessed through emailing csaacademy@per.gov.ie. And then support on the CWMF can be accessed via construction@per.gov.ie. So that draws a close to our presentation. So thanks very much for your attention, and we'd like to take any questions that there may be now at this stage.
Okay, thanks very much, Fiona. Thanks very much, Colin, for a very insightful presentation. A lot of detail there and a lot of resources, I suppose, for people moving forward. So that's really useful. So we will obviously share the presentation and recording afterwards for people to reference back to. So look, if there is questions that you have or have sparked into your mind, please continue to put them into the Q&A box, I suppose, and we'll take as many questions. And as I said, afterwards, we will do an FAQ and circulate that for people that weren't here today, but also just have a reference point to come back. Fiona, if I can just maybe just start with you first of all, if that's okay. Just you mentioned there, for costs under 5,000 that you need to obtain three quotes. And I suppose there's a bit of confusion or just maybe a bit of misunderstanding around the terms seeking versus obtaining three quotes. I suppose obtaining and seeking three quotes can be very different for smaller community groups that might be, hard to do that. So can you just add a bit of clarity on what's the difference between obtaining and seeking, and what's the definitive answer, I suppose, in that and what's required?
Yeah, so I think especially for when you're considering kind of smaller areas or 'cause you want to kind of look at maybe SMEs and social enterprises to try and seek as many quotes as possible, we kind of say best practice is to get three quotes. So if you can obtain three quotes, that would kind of be best practice. Like you can do them verbally for under 5,000, but it's best to kind of have that transparency aspect of it and get it by email or put it in writing, just for your own sake as well. So that's why we kind of recommend getting three quotes that way and having it in writing as well. So obviously you could go out to more, you could go out to 5, and then if you were to get back in three quotes, that would be best practice.
Okay. And yeah, I suppose in terms of verbal quotes versus email and formal quotes, obviously best practices for the emails, but in terms of showing evidence of the verbal quotes, how would you go about doing that, or what evidence should you be thinking about when you're obtaining them?
Yeah, what we would always kind of recommend is if you are getting them verbally, like whether it's by phone or in person, that it would always be best to follow up in an email just to kind of outline what was discussed. Because that would just be best practice. It kind of covers yourself and it covers then if anyone kind of alerts to say that they have any issue with your process or with a contract that does come afterwards. So it would always be best that if you do it verbally, just note it down in an email somewhere. And then as well, it also provides that written document in terms of what was actually discussed, because you know yourself, oftentimes if you're on a phone call, someone could say a price and then when you interpret it later, it's actually a different price, anything like that. So it just keeps everything really clear and really concise and transparent.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Just in terms of handling, I suppose, conflict of interest, then I suppose there's a couple of questions coming here. So, for example, if there was a request for tender and one of the people that had applied as a family member or a relative, I suppose, what additional evidence or documentation should be demonstrated to ensure everything is fair and transparent and I suppose competitive. So any advice that you would give in terms of conflict of interest in that
Y-
case?
Yeah, we actually have a bit about conflict of interest in the public procurement guidelines. So I definitely recommend having a look at that because it's quite hard to scope out conflict of interest because it can range. So, like, what may be most appropriate, and that would be up to the contracting authority. What may be most appropriate is for that person to not take part of any evaluation, or maybe that it's okay for them to take part of evaluation and they've declared it in advance. It's quite tough with conflict of interest without knowing the specific details, but what we would say is it has to be appropriate to the contract, to the kind of connection with the conflict of interest there as well. But we do have a little bit about conflict of interest in the public procurement guidelines, so I definitely recommend having a look at them.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Just to go back, I suppose, to one of the earlier questions as well. I suppose a few people have said, in particular, if they seek five quotes and they only get one return, I suppose, what did they do in that situation? It can be quite difficult, for community groups. They've already put out requests and et cetera, and they only get one reply. What should they do in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's best to try and get as many quotes as possible if you feel as though, like, it could be even a case of maybe the market is actually a little bit bigger than initially anticipated. So it might be best kind of doing that little bit of desktop research and see is there actually more players that may be a little bit further out than what you were kind of mapping out initially. But I'd say, like, there's huge appetite there from SMEs and from social enterprises. And sometimes social enterprises can be kind of overlooked or they're not at the forefront of people's minds. They mightn't be as familiar of them. So even like a little bit of desktop research to see what social enterprises might be in that space. Like, there can be a lot in terms of catering and things like that. And that might kind of broaden your net as well when going out for quotes.
Perfect. Okay. So just in terms of, I suppose, splitting up request for tender, I suppose if you could give us a little bit of detail on that. So just say, for example, it's a project and maybe there's one or two or even three different elements that could be quite different. Is Could they go out in one tender and a supplier then could say I'll apply for this one or I'll apply for all, or is it mandatory that they have to apply for all? What's the kind of guidelines around that?
Yeah, that can kind of depend on what way the contract's broken down. So what I would kind of recommend is in the pre-tendering stage, like before you actually go out to tender, maybe evaluate and see if it might be useful to break it down into lots. That might be, it's a very SME friendly approach to it. So in that case, you could have suppliers that might tender for two of the lots. They might tender for all three of them, or they might only tender for one of them. It kind of gives that little bit of flexibility there anyway, and then you can review all the tenders then received on that and decide which would be the best. So it might be kind of more useful in the pre-tendering stage to really evaluate it that way and to break it down beforehand before going out to tender.
So it can be one request for tender, but break it down into different lots, and then suppliers can apply for the individual lots, or they can apply for all the lots together, let's call it.
Yeah, exactly. It gives them that flexibility that if a supplier can fulfill all three, they can certainly apply for all three. But you might get as well, what we would promote a consortium. So that would be when SMEs kind of make an arrangement themselves that they're going to apply for a contract together. That opens it up to that way as well. But also then suppliers can just apply for one lot as well.
And that consortium can be a very ad hoc. It doesn't have a legal structure. For example, if I'm friends with another business owner and we see a tender and we decide to go for it, we don't need to have any contractual agreements with each other. It's just two businesses going to try be successful in winning that particular tender. There doesn't need to be a set of business between them.
Well, with a consortium, it would be quite structured in the sense that you would have that sort of understanding, and you'd use the tender document as your kind of
Yeah.
legal basis, and you're applying, so it keeps everything quite clear. For consortium, we actually done a webinar there only recently, only last week, and the slides for that will be up online on the OGP website. But also the CCPC have a consortium, how to form a consortium webpage, and that's really useful. It kind of talks about the breakdown of it, making sure that you're compliant as well, because you do have to have an agreement of, okay, well, what aspects will one business look after, what aspects will another business look after. So there would be a bit of structure and a bit of kind of format and agreement there beforehand as well. And it would also be very transparent and clear that these businesses are partnering together to fulfill this contract.
Okay. There's another question here just around the correct procedure. If a promoter uses the e-tenders platform to publish a tender and fails to receive any tenders or fails to receive suitable tenders that match the criteria, how can they directly procure after that? Like, what's their next steps, I suppose, in that sense?
I suppose probably the best next step would be to kind of review it and understand, what way you've formatted that tender. Is there maybe a gap there that you're missing out on? Is it maybe like to really start with the review process first and try and understand why haven't you gotten bids for it? Is it maybe a pricing issue? Is it maybe the selection criteria? So I think a review, like an internal review yourselves, would probably be most appropriate for a first point of call.
Okay. And there's kind of a similar question, I suppose, Fiona, around that as well. If you push something out to tender and then all your quotes come back over the amount that you had allocated or it exceeds that threshold that you said, what's the kind of next steps in that area? Or what basis do you go around? Can they then cut back into certain elements of that particular request for tender? Did they need to cut it back to a smaller amount, or what's the recommended in that area?
Yeah, I suppose that's similar to the previous question in terms of looking at it objectively or with clean eyes and try to see, okay, well, why was this so much more than what we expected? That's why we kind of recommend that if you can engage with the market, that preliminary market consultation is really useful, because it kind of helps the market inform you what's kind of the current level at the market at the moment. And we actually have a web page on the OGP website on that as well, all about preliminary market consultation and how to fulfill that compliantly. But I definitely say to take a step back, try and look at it with fresh eyes and evaluate it that way. But also desktop research can be really useful in that, in terms of maybe there's more players in the market, or maybe there's more developments in the market than you have anticipated. And that certainly happens, and it's best to kind of review that.
Okay, I suppose you would probably hear a lot, I suppose, through different community groups, etc., that they've gone out to tender, for example, and due to delays, increase in prices, fluctuation in materials, ex etc., that their tenders or sorry, the tenders received then are actually expired or out of date, or et cetera, et cetera. What I suppose is best practice in those situations, is it clearly a case that you have to go back out again, or is there alterations that you can be made in the selection criteria or evaluation criteria?
Yeah, I think in terms of the time period that pricing needs to be set for is set out in the tender document. So if that price is increased after that, you're probably looking at a new tender. But it's much like Fiona is saying, like every instance of this needs to be reviewed on its merits. So if that is the case, you need to review it and see if next time round do you have to go out and extend the periods that pricing has to be held for, to give you that level of flexibility or things like that. So yeah, you need to review it, and you probably need to go out to tender again.
So is the recommendation there, I suppose, Colin, when you're designing your tender request, that you're probably making allowances for a little bit of wiggle room around the time period in case there's delays and stuff, to give yourselves that, and then it's, I suppose, on the supplier then to adhere and to tender based on that then, and if they can't meet that criteria, then it's just not suitable, I suppose.
Yeah, and there are specific elements within the CWMF that we wouldn't be totally over as that's sitting
Yeah.
with the infrastructure side. So there are specific elements in that, especially with works. But I think going back to what Fiona said, an awful lot of this comes back to the pre-market engagement, because you have those conversations with the market and you'll be able to see what can they stand over. So you'll get a very good idea of where you stand by engaging with the market.
Okay, perfect. I think beyond this probably goes back to an earlier point for yourself, and it's probably maybe a short enough answer. If you're going out for tender for materials of like €200, should you follow up with emails? I think your recommendation there is that you should. Is that fair to
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, no, I know it might kind of sound quite tedious, but it kind of covers you. You have kind of that paper trail for it, and it keeps everything very clear and concise and transparent there as well for yourselves and also for the suppliers. And
Okay.
it can be something as brief as just a quick note, a quick email, just to clarify things.
Okay. I suppose look, there's probably a question here, and maybe it's not for yourself, but maybe you might be able to direct people. So, just for example, say you've gone out to tender and you've procured a contractor, and there's a breakdown of relations between the promoter and the contractor, and midway through the project, and maybe the project mightn't be able to be delivered. What's the best practice in that scenario, or maybe that's something that's outside your remit.
From without having further details, you'd be falling back on whatever the details are included in the contract. So whatever mitigation elements are built into the contract, if you have to go to mediation or whatever is set out within the contract, you're going to fall back on that at that stage if there is a breakdown in relations.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the advice to fall back on your original contract. That's great. Thanks very much. So just if a contractor does not set up a consortium and tenders for two lots, for example, but subcontracts out the work, uh, either being supplies or services for one of the lots, is that okay? So someone wins the successful tender, says that they will do two lots, but then they subcontract one of the lots. Is that okay? Is that allowed, or is that a no-no?
Think, Fiona, this would be something that would be set out in the initial tender as well. So it has to be set out from the outset. So depending on what you're looking for, if you set that out within the tender that elements can't be outsourced or they can be outsourced, so it's going to go back to the original tender that's being sent out.
Perfect. Okay. So I think we've probably kind of covered this already, and again, it kind of comes back to it. What happens if there's an overrun in cost after the tender has been awarded? I suppose it's up to the supplier to deliver at cost. Is that again? It goes back to the original what they tendered for.
It goes back to you're going to come back and fall back onto your contract, whatever's contractually agreed there. So you may have to engage with legal advice on that at that stage.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it just shows that like the contract is so crucially important, and it's really important to know what you've put in your contract. So that kind of pre-tendering phase can be so crucial as well to try and scope out, all eventualities in a sense.
Okay. There was a course mentioned at csa.gov.ie. Is there a cost for that course? Someone is just wondering.
As far as we're aware, there's no cost associated with it, but the CSA will be able to confirm that as well.
Perfect. Okay. Just in terms, I suppose, going back to the three quotes, as we said, it can be very challenging in the current market environment. If you go for three quotes and more are sought, but you only receive one, how can you demonstrate maybe that that one is good value for money?
Yeah, that's quite a tricky one, and it depends on what the contract is and what the good or the service that's being procured is as well. I would kind of come back to doing that initial market research, and maybe even trying to do a preliminary market consultation as well, to see is that they're the only player in the market, or is there actually more out there that maybe you haven't approached or just haven't become aware of it. Because like it's so easy to miss an email or to miss an alert or things like that. Sometimes it can take doing it twice to get the competition that you need there.
Okay. Just, I suppose, following on from that subcontractor question that we had a couple of minutes ago. Now, I'm sorry, these are very rapid fire, so thanks very much for doing brilliant. In terms of building contracts, and this is probably over on the other side of the house, Colin, so maybe this is a question that you might have to take away, but we'll just pose it anyway. A, a lot of building contracts would have subcontract elements to it as well. So does that need to be in your contract? How do you deal with that clearly from the outset?
So I would suggest that that would be called out specifically within the CWMF and the suite of documents that they have there. I'm not particularly sure. It's not currently sitting with us. So I'd say if there are queries around that, get in contact with the CWMF guys and their website, and they'd be able to tell you offhand exactly what the instance is. And I would suggest that an awful lot of building contracts, an awful lot of this work is subbed out. So I would suggest that that's par for the course within works contracts.
Okay. Can you give a short summary on what constitute work services, please? Architect question mark, engineer question mark. So what constitutes works services? And what-
To be honest, I'm not totally certain, but I would suggest that it's your engineers, your architects, everything like that. Again, this would sit with the infrastructure division. So, um, essentially anything that you would be procuring, in terms of advice on carrying out the works. That's what I would be suggesting, but that would be another question for the guys in the CWMF side of things.
Okay, perfect. So I suppose look, there's another question here around when you're reviewing the procurement and the winning bid isn't isn't the lowest because it scored higher on the technical kind of specification of it. So how would you assess that that was correct? So say when you're not an expert in a particular sector, you're evaluating procurement and two similar companies have a relative experience, but one scores higher on the technical assistance. Can that be what should the person be looking to verify that it was fair and justified in that regard? So they have similar experience, but one scores higher on technical scores. So how do you ensure that that's fair and transparent?
I think it goes back to your marking structure within the request for tender, and that has to be clear and transparent at the time you have. So let's just say you have 40% cost, 60% quality. So then the technical experience comes into the quality, and you have clear parameters that will give you 80% of a score, 60%. So all of this would be in our guidelines of how to set out exactly your scoring methodology. And then once your scoring methodology is set up correctly, that is transparent. So once they hit those particular scoring marks within the quality element, that is transparent and that is above board.
Okay, perfect. Um, Sorry, I'm just looking through some questions. So, how do you demonstrate or differentiate between sublots and artificial splitting to keep costs below the threshold? So, that's one of the questions coming in. So, what would you say is how do you differentiate between sublots and artificial splitting in terms of procurement?
Fiona, I'd be thinking this is still part of the same tender, so it wouldn't be artificial splitting as such because it would still be part of the same tender. So it's one threshold for the tender.
Yeah, and if you're splitting it into lots, that would be quite clear and it would be quite um specific laid out to say this is lot one, this is what comes under lot one, this is lot two, this is what is coming under lot two. So it wouldn't be artificial in that sense then when you're splitting it up because you'd have it very, very clear and people can tender for both lots or just one of the lots as well.
Okay. So just to be clear, I suppose around that there's a kind of a clarification question there as well. So if all lots exceed the 50,000, is that going into the next threshold, or is each separate lot, consider below 50,000, is that separate then as well? So if they all exceed the 50,000, does that then go up to the next threshold, or is it separate?
So all lots would be under the one tender.
Okay.
So if any of them are over 50K, they're over the threshold.
Yeah, you'd look at the overall tender rather
Yeah.
than just at specific lots.
Okay. Are three quotes required necessary for ad hoc items for less than €100?
The piece with the 3 quotes is this is about governance and transparency. So essentially what you are doing here is covering yourself by getting those 3 quotes. So obtaining those 3 quotes is really important. And anything under 5K, you want to make sure that there's no questions coming back of where this public money or public funds was spent. So it's a big piece to focus on the transparency element. So the best that you can do to obtain those 3 quotes, and make sure you have those 3 quotes to back it up and say, listen, here, this is what we have, and this is the quote that we've gone with.
I suppose we're coming with about 7 or 8 minutes left now, so please do send in any final questions that you might have. Just in terms of a lot of the resource, there's loads of resources there, guys, that you've outlined throughout your presentation. I suppose if you were a community volunteer, I suppose starting this process, where's the recommended steps that you would go to first? Where's the one source that you would rely on as a individual if you're taking off your professional hat and you're now involved in your local community group? How would you go about it?
Yeah, I definitely look at that particular section of the website, and we can send you over the link. I know the slides will be shared afterwards, so if you want to send that link as well to the specific part of the OGP website. And we have it laid out in terms of resources. Here's the legal section and here's the strategic section. I'd start with the guidelines, because I think the guidelines are set out quite clear. And are kind of easy to navigate in that way. And then if you have kind of further questions on specific elements, that section of the website is quite clear to go into more detail on different areas. So I'd definitely start with the guidelines. I don't know, probably Colin would agree on that as well. The guidelines are kind of a good starting point from that aspect.
Yeah, and our policy resources where you'll find the guidelines. So there's a wealth of information in there, but the guidelines is the main starting point, and then you can build up from there as well.
Yeah. And like if people find that they have questions afterwards, like we do have a really good support help desk there as well. So I think the email was up on one of the slides there as well. So support@ogp.gov.ie, and they're always happy to help as well. If there's something specific as well that you're looking for and you can't seem to find as well, just email them and they'll be able to point you in the right direction.
Is there templates or available on the resources there as well that groups can use?
Yeah. And it's in that same section, and you'll see it quite clearly. So we can send over that link as well for people.
Okay. And just someone wonder, is there a cost involved with using e-tenders?
No cost at all.
Okay, perfect. Is there what are the penalties for non-compliance with procurement guidelines? Is another question coming in here.
There's no penalties as such. So if let's just say you were to go to tender and you weren't fair and transparent, then there could be litigation brought by one of the suppliers that didn't award the contract. So I think that's one of the major issues, and that's why we need to ensure that there's good governance with public procurement and that everything is transparent and above board.
Okay. I suppose that is the point that we're trying to get across here as well. For good governance, in interests of fairness and transparency, it should be done for these reasons as well, and also creates a competitive environment, I suppose, for people, and hopefully gets more value for money for the community group that wants to deliver the project, but also for the public good, I suppose, in that sense as well. We have a couple of minutes left, I suppose. Guys, I'm going to ask yourselves if there's anything final, I suppose, that you want to say, and then I'll ask Marie to come in if there's anything that she wants to finish off with. So, Colin and Fiona, if there's any outstanding points or feedback or issues or anything that you want to mention, particularly, please take an opportunity now to do so.
Yeah, I'll go on, Fiona, and I'll come in after.
Yeah. I was just going to say the resource section that we have, like it is quite clear and it's quite easy to navigate. But like if you do come across any questions or queries after looking through there, like, do go to the support desk and ask them any queries that you do have. I know sometimes we often get asked that people have been approached by suppliers and say they want to get involved in public procurement and don't know how to do that. We have a dedicated part of the OGP website. It's on the main page. It's called Sell to Government. And up there, it has information for suppliers. So kind of the section that we're directing people to are for the buyers. But if you do get queries from suppliers kind of saying they want to get involved, they don't know anything about public procurement and want to go down that avenue, that's quite a good resource for them, just to flag that as well in case anyone does get those questions.
Perfect.
The
Colin?
only thing that I'd add to that is like public procurement can be quite daunting. So lean on the resources; they're there for you. So use them as much as you can. Use the support email in the OGP. Reach out to the guys in the CWMF. Like there are resources there to be leaned on, while you're trying to navigate the procurement landscape.
Okay, so look, we're almost at the end. So, Marie, I'm going to pass over to yourself and the department if there's anything final that you want to say from your side before I finish up.
Thanks, James. No, just I want to say thanks very much again to Colin and Fiona for being available. And even I suppose just looking at the number of questions that are coming through there, it just shows you, how challenging this area is for some people and people in the community groups. So it's very helpful that you're able to point us to additional training that's online and the additional resources on your website. And it's very helpful that you're here today, I suppose, to answer those questions. So a big thank you from the department and the leader unit. I hope everyone has benefited from today's event. I'm sure myself and my team have also picked up, I suppose, areas for us to consider further ourselves. So thank you.
So yeah, just to echo, I suppose, that point from Marie and her department as well, that we want to thank Colin and Fiona, I suppose, for taking the time today to make the presentation to the group. It's obviously a very challenging area, as we've seen from the amount of questions that come in, and a lot of quick fire questions thrown at you. So thanks very much for your time this morning. But just again to remind everyone that this has been recorded, that it will be shared as a resource for people to use afterwards. We are taking all the questions that have come through the chat function, and we will share them with Colin and Fiona as well for clarity, to make sure that we're sharing the right information with everyone that attended this morning, and that can be used as a resource for other groups that weren't able to attend, but also going forward as well. So just to say that. And again, I suppose this topic is very challenging for a lot of people. It comes on the back of feedback we received from surveys that we've done in the capacity building workshops for ourselves and the department. So, as always, we welcome particular topics that you would like to see ourselves and the CAP network to cover in partnership with Marie and her division as well. So, we encourage you to please do feed us in future topics as well that we should be considering. And again, we can do them in physical events like we've done, or short, snappy webinars like this as well. Might be a good opportunity to get a large number together in a shorter period of time. So please do feed that in. For just for myself, I want to thank my own team who's working here in the background in terms of correlating the questions and social media and technical support. So to thank the CAP Network team, and to thank everyone for attending this morning, and our speakers, and obviously to Marie and her division again. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one of these, or an in-person event later on. So thanks very much for your attention, and looking forward to the next event. Have a good day, everyone.